15. Darkest Secrets Behind 70s. Classic R&B songs. Before fame found him, Bill Withers was tightening bolts on airplane parts, not writing one of the most haunting songs in soul history. Ain't No Sunshine wasn't born in a studio of stars, but in the heart of a working man who had never studied music. When record executives tried to delete his repetitive "I Know" section, Bill refused and made history instead. That stubborn moment turned raw emotion into timeless art. But the story behind his breakthrough is darker than you think. Stay tuned, subscribe, and uncover the pain behind the poetry only on Legends of Black Excellence. 1. Marvin Gaye. Let's Get It On, 1973. When Let's Get It On was released in 1973, the world heard desire wrapped in velvet harmony, but Marvin Gaye's heart was breaking beneath every note. Behind the sensual groove lay a man consumed by grief after losing his beloved duet partner Tammy Terrell in 1970. Her death shattered him, leaving a silence only music could fill. Gaye, 34 at the time, found new inspiration and turmoil in Janice Hunter, a 17-year-old who became both his muse and moral conflict. Their relationship, considered scandalous, even then blurred the line between passion and pain. In the studio, Marvin didn't simply sing of love, he bled through melody. Let's Get It On became more than a seduction anthem. It was a man's plea to feel alive again after unbearable loss. The lush strings, the slow-burning rhythm, and the sighs between verses carried an ache too heavy for words, turning one man's private sorrow into a universal cry for intimacy. To the public, Marvin Gaye was a smooth visionary, but privately he was haunted by guilt lust and emotional exhaustion. He described his creative process during Let's Get It On as therapy in rhythm, where he confronted loneliness, faith, and forbidden attraction. Producer Ed Townsend, who co-wrote the song, recalled that Marvin treated every lyric as confession. The sensual moans and whispered ad-libs weren't studio gimmicks. They were nervous exhalations of a man wrestling his demons. While fans saw romance, Gaye was exposing the fragility of human desire and the damage of unhealed wounds. Commercially, the single became a cultural phenomenon, topping the Billboard Hot 100 and selling over 1.5 million copies. Yet for Marvin, success didn't erase the inner void. Behind the polished smile in interviews was a man still grieving, still searching for redemption through sound, a preacher of pleasure carrying the cross of heartbreak. Inner City Blues, Make Me Wanna Holler, 1971. 2 years earlier, Marvin had already shown the world that soul music could challenge society. Inner City Blues, Make Me Wanna Holler from his 1971 masterpiece, What's Going On, was not just rhythm, it was revolution. The track emerged from his anguish over the Vietnam War, the loss of his brother Frankie, and the despair of black communities facing poverty and police brutality. Lines like "trigger-happy policing" and "money," "we make it before we see it," cut so deeply that federal authorities took notice. Sources later confirmed the FBI quietly monitored Marvin due to his growing influence and outspoken social messages. The smooth bass line masked a dangerous truth: this was gospel for the oppressed. It was the first time soul music confronted America, so directly transforming dance floors into sanctuaries of resistance. As fame intensified, paranoia followed. Marvin became withdrawn, convinced unseen forces were watching. Friends described him pacing alone in dimly lit studios, murmuring prayers between takes. Inner City Blues had given voice to millions, but it also isolated its creator. The man who once healed others through song now feared his own words. Yet his courage changed the course of R&B forever, proving that vulnerability could be revolutionary. Together, Let's Get It On and Inner City Blues reveal the duality of Marvin Gaye, lover and prophet, sinner and savior. Behind the silk and rhythm lived a man torn between flesh and faith, whose darkest secrets made his art immortal. 2. Al Green, Love and Happiness, 1972. When Love and Happiness hit the airwaves in 1972, Al Green was celebrated as the high priest of soul. a man whose voice could baptize even the most wounded hearts. The track's jubilant rhythm gospel-infused claps and velvet phrasing became a blueprint for modern R&B. Yet behind that radiant sound was a storm waiting to strike. Just 2 years after its release, tragedy invaded his Memphis home. His girlfriend, Mary Woodson, scalded him with boiling grits before taking her own life, moments after discovering his refusal to marry her. The incident left Al with third-degree burns and scars that extended far beyond the skin. That day didn't just mark an assault, it marked the death of the man he once was. Love and happiness. Once a joyful testament to affection became an ironic echo of loss. The same voice that sang of divine joy now trembled with guilt and mourning as Green withdrew from the world that had once adored him. Haunted by that night, Al Green turned inward. The music that had once been his freedom became a reminder of his pain. In the aftermath, he began preaching at his own full gospel tabernacle church in Memphis, trading glittering stages for wooden pulpits. His sermons replaced lyrics, his Bible replaced the microphone. He spoke of redemption, not romance. Yet the world could never separate the reverend from the rhythm. Even as he sang hymns, echoes of love and happiness lingered like ghosts in every chord. Critics hailed him as a man reborn, but those who knew him saw someone who could never fully escape that moment of tragedy. It wasn't just his career that changed, it was his spirit. The man who once embodied sensuality had become the living symbol of penance. His journey from R&B royalty to preacher wasn't a reinvention, it was a confession set to melody. Let's Stay Together, 1971. The roots of that heartbreak traced back to Let's Stay Together, 1971. The song that defined Al Green's career. Released on High Records, it topped both the Billboard Hot 100 and R&B charts, selling over 1 million copies. To listeners, it was the perfect love song, an eternal promise set to a silky groove. But few knew that Green wrote it just after ending a serious relationship with a woman who had pleaded for reconciliation. He recorded the song immortalizing the vow to stay together, then walked away from her days later. It was a lie sung so beautifully the world never noticed. That emotional betrayal laid the groundwork for the chaos that would follow with Mary Woodson. The song's enduring warmth, once hailed as romantic, now carries a haunting irony. Its tenderness conceals heartbreak's cruel aftermath. Decades later, Let's Stay Together remains a cultural monument, even being performed at presidential inaugurations and sampled by generations of artists. Yet for Al Green, its legacy is double-edged. The track that made him immortal also foreshadowed the pain that would transform him forever. Between Love and Happiness and Let's Stay Together, Green lived 2 lives, one as the soul singer who defined love, and another as the man who learned how fragile love truly is. Behind every falsetto lay a wound, behind every blessing a scar. His songs became hymns of contradiction, joy, and sorrow entwined in perfect harmony. That is the true darkness of Al Green's legacy, that his greatest triumphs were born from his deepest suffering, and his most beloved lyrics were written on the edge of despair. 3. The Isley Brothers. That Lady, 1973. When That Lady stormed the charts in 1973, the Isley Brothers reinvented themselves with an electrifying fusion of funk rock and soul. The track, released under their label T-Neck Records, became a top 10 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 and sold over 1 million copies. Yet beneath its fiery energy was a story of deep family tension. That Lady was actually a rebirth of their earlier song Beautiful Lady from 1964, a sweet doo-wop tune reimagined into a bold, psychedelic anthem. But this remake was more than an artistic revival. It was a power struggle. Younger brother Ernie Isley, barely in his 20s, introduced a searing guitar solo inspired by Jimi Hendrix, who had once played with the Isleys. His electrifying sound symbolized a new era that some in the group weren't ready to embrace. The band's older members, including Ronald and O'Kelly Isley, feared the family's traditional R&B essence was being diluted by rock influences. Arguments erupted in studio sessions over direction, style, and control. Ernie's blazing guitar wasn't just a solo, it was a statement. To him, the Isley Brothers could no longer survive by following the past. They had to evolve or fade. That creative rebellion split loyalties within the group. Some saw Ernie's innovation as liberation, while others viewed it as betrayal. The tension grew so sharp that producers described recording sessions filled with silence between takes and separate seating during mixing. Even success couldn't mend the quiet resentment brewing behind the hits. Adding to the drama was the rumored inspiration behind That Lady. Music insiders whispered that the mysterious lady at the song's center was based on a woman once romantically linked to another member of the band. Whether truth or myth, the gossip amplified existing friction, turning the song into both a musical and emotional battlefield. For the audience, That Lady sounded like pure confidence, falsetto harmonies gliding over funk-driven riffs. But for the Isleys, it was a coded confrontation, a family pouring real-life rivalry into rhythm. Every strum of Ernie's guitar cut deeper, blurring the line between love song and declaration of independence. Despite the turmoil, That Lady reshaped the group's destiny. It proved the Isley Brothers could evolve beyond Motown's polished soul and step into a rawer, more experimental space. The success laid the groundwork for their future classics like Fight the Power and For the Love of You, where funk met emotional storytelling. Yet the cost of that transformation was high personal wounds, divided visions, and years of unresolved tension. Behind the groove that moved a generation was a family torn between tradition and transformation. That Lady remains both their rebirth and their reckoning, a reminder that innovation often begins where harmony ends. 4. The OJs. Backstabbers, 1972. When Backstabbers hit the airwaves in 1972, the OJs sounded unstoppable. The song's smooth Philadelphia groove, arranged by producers Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, defined the golden era of Philly soul. But behind those silky harmonies was a warning wrapped in rhythm. The lyrics, "They smile in your face all the time, they want to take your place," were not poetic fiction. They were born from real betrayal the group had endured. Co-producer Tom Bell later revealed that the song reflected how the trio felt constantly surrounded by deceit in both friendship and business. At the height of their success, the OJs were learning a painful truth about fame. The higher you climb, the sharper the knives become. Internally, the group had weathered storms long before Backstabbers became their signature. By 1972, founding member Bill Iles had departed, and Eddie Levert, Walter Williams, and William Powell carried the name forward. The recording sessions at Sigma Sound Studios were marked by cautious energy, an undercurrent of mistrust, fueled by past disappointments with managers and labels. The industry, they realized, was a game of masks. Every handshake could hide a scheme. The song's paranoid tone wasn't staged. It was lived experience transformed into melody. Producer Tom Bell described it best. "We were really living that paranoia, watching our backs, questioning everyone's loyalty. What began as a catchy soul number became an anthem for survival in a cutthroat business." Musically, Backstabbers was revolutionary. Its orchestral strings, lush horns, and tight rhythm section disguised its darkness beneath a polished sound. Fans danced unaware that the OJs were exercising their frustrations through every lyric. The song reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and topped the R&B chart, selling over 1 million copies. But while success glittered publicly, the group privately battled exhaustion and distrust. They often avoided outside social circles, fearing exploitation or manipulation. To them, Backstabbers wasn't just a hit. It was a coded confession of how it felt to live under constant scrutiny and deceit, both in business and among peers. Ironically, the record that warned of betrayal became their ticket to immortality. It cemented the OJ's place in R&B history and launched the Philadelphia International label into global recognition. Yet for the men behind the music, the lyrics remained a mirror of their reality. The industry they conquered was the same one that broke their trust. Even decades later, Eddie Levert would recall how that era taught us never to confuse smiles with sincerity. Backstabbers endures not only as a soul classic, but as a prophecy one that revealed how easily loyalty can fracture when ambition and envy collide. Beneath the Groove lies the group's greatest truth success in the 70s soul scene came with a price, and the OJs paid it in silence. 5. Minnie Riperton. Every Time He Comes Around, 1974. In 1974, Every Time He Comes Around shimmered through radios like a dream, delicate, angelic, and deceptively serene. Minnie Riperton's voice, soaring effortlessly into her signature whistle register, sounded like the very definition of light. But behind the ethereal beauty of the track from her album Perfect Angel lay a haunting truth. Co-written with Stevie Wonder, the song was far from a simple ode to romance. It carried the pulse of obsession anxiety and a quiet sense of foreboding. At that time, Minnie had begun feeling unusual pain and fatigue, subtle hints of the illness that would later take her life. Though she hadn't yet been diagnosed with breast cancer, she once admitted in interviews that she felt something wasn't right in her body. Every note she hit was filled with a fragile intensity, a cry for comfort disguised as melody. In the studio, Stevie Wonder guided the production with his signature warmth, layering soft percussion and shimmering keyboard tones to cradle Minnie's vulnerable vocal. Yet even he sensed the strange duality in her performance. Beneath her radiant smile, there was fear. Minnie poured herself into the song as if time were slipping away, using her voice not just as an instrument but as a diary. Her whistle tones, which later defined her as one of the most technically gifted vocalists in R&B, were in this moment something else entirely. They weren't merely high notes. They were confessions. Each piercing register floated like a spirit above the music, capturing the ache of someone who knew she was being followed by an invisible shadow. What the world heard as celestial bliss was in truth a soul trembling at the edge of mortality. When Perfect Angel was released, critics praised its tenderness and purity, unaware of the emotional gravity behind its creation. Minnie's fans interpreted Every Time He Comes Around as a story of love and devotion, but in hindsight it feels almost prophetic. The lyrics, "Whenever he smiles, I feel the earth move under me," reveal not just affection, but dependence, the kind that borders on surrender. That vulnerability mirrored her own confrontation with mortality, her quiet acceptance wrapped in song. She wasn't writing about a man, she was writing about something much larger. The fleeting nature of joy, the haunting awareness that beauty can't last forever. Tragically, Minnie Riperton's intuition proved real. Only a year after the song's release, she was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer and passed away in 1979 at just 31 years old. Listening now, Every Time He Comes Around feels like a whisper from beyond a melody, suspended between love and eternity. What makes it one of the darkest secrets in 70s R&B is not scandal or controversy, but truth. The song that sounded like sunlight was really a prelude to farewell. Through her transcendent gift, Minnie turned impending tragedy into immortal beauty. Her voice still hovers delicate and defiant, reminding us that even angels can sing of fear. 6. Ann Peebles, I'm Gonna Tear Your Playhouse Down, 1973. When I'm Gonna Tear Your Playhouse Down erupted from radios in 1973, it carried a power rarely heard from a female voice in soul music. Ann Peebles, the Memphis-born powerhouse signed to High Records, had already built a reputation for emotional honesty, but this track pushed boundaries. Written by Earl Randall, the song tells the story of a woman fed up with deceit, ready to dismantle her lover's lies one wall at a time. Yet its fierce energy sparked controversy. Radio programmers across the U.S. labeled it too aggressive for a woman, and refused to play it, fearing backlash from conservative listeners. In a decade when male singers could shout, plead, and threaten in love songs without question, Ann's unapologetic fire challenged the industry's double standard. Peebles refused to back down. When questioned about the song's tone, she famously replied, "If a man can say it, I can say it." That simple statement became a declaration of artistic independence and gender equality in an era still defined by male dominance. In the studio, her voice struck a balance between fury and control, not screaming, but simmering with authority. Backed by producer Willie Mitchell's lush yet gritty arrangement, Peebles turned what could have been a bitter breakup tune into a statement of defiance. The horns punched like warnings, the drums marched like determination, and every syllable she delivered cut with purpose. Her confidence turned the so-called aggression into empowerment, transforming what the label feared into an anthem of self-worth. Although some radio stations kept their ban, "I'm Gonna Tear Your Playhouse Down," found its audience through word of mouth and live performances. Female listeners in particular connected deeply, viewing it as a rare song where a woman took back her voice, her dignity, and her story. In an age before feminism became mainstream in R&B, Peebles was already embodying it without slogans or speeches, just truth through tone. Decades later, artists from Paul Young to Etta James would cover the track, recognizing its blend of vulnerability and vengeance. But none matched the raw intimacy of Ann's original version, which carried both heartbreak and hard-won strength. In retrospect, "I'm Gonna Tear Your Playhouse Down" stands as one of the earliest feminist manifestos in soul music, a record that defied silence and reshaped how women could express anger and pain. What began as a rejected single became a cultural milestone, proving that honesty need not be polite to be powerful. Behind its smoky groove was a woman demanding respect on her own terms. Ann Peebles didn't just tear down a playhouse, she tore down expectations. Her voice echoed a truth that would inspire generations to follow. Empowerment isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a steady fire that refuses to fade. 7. Ben E. King, Supernatural Thing, 1975. When Supernatural Thing exploded onto the charts in 1975, it marked a long-awaited comeback for Ben E. King, the legendary voice behind Stand By Me. The song's hypnotic bassline, slick funk groove, and mystical lyrics made it one of his most infectious hits, reaching number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 and topping the R&B chart. But behind its danceable rhythm lurked a story that haunted the singer for years. Just weeks before recording, King had collapsed on stage from exhaustion during a live performance in New York. Doctors warned him to rest, yet he returned to the studio driven by a strange sense of urgency, as if something was compelling him to finish the track no matter the cost. That determination would soon blur into dread when the song's success began to coincide with a series of eerie, unexplainable events. After its release, Supernatural Thing became more than a hit. It became a legend, wrapped in whispers. Crew members recalled bizarre malfunctions during nearly every performance. Amplifiers shorting out mid-show lights, flickering without cause, and one terrifying incident in Detroit where a stage light burst into flames moments after the opening riff. Superstitious fans began calling the song cursed, claiming its title had somehow manifested its own energy. King himself, usually a calm and rational man, began to share their unease. "It's my biggest hit," he once admitted, "and it scares me." The phrase became part of his lore, the soul singer who gave the world joy, but couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was following him each time he sang. Musically, Supernatural Thing represented a bold transformation. King, who had spent years overshadowed by his earlier ballads, dove headfirst into the world of funk and disco. The production, led by Tony Sylvester and Bert DeCoteau, was sleek, yet unsettling, a tight rhythm section pulsing beneath lyrics about powers beyond human control. To listeners, it was sensual and mystical. To King, it was unnervingly personal. He spoke often about how performing it live felt different, as if the energy in the room changed with each repetition of the chorus. Whether coincidence or curse, that sense of unease never left him. In time, Supernatural Thing became both blessing and burden. The song that resurrected Ben E. King's career, yet left him forever wary of its shadow. He continued to perform it out of gratitude to fans, but often kept the performances brief, never lingering on its closing refrain. Even decades later, he would joke that he respected the song too much to play with it. For a man whose voice defined devotion and hope, this was his one brush with the unexplained. Beneath its funky rhythm lay a mystery that blurred faith and fear, proof that even in the golden age of R&B, some grooves carried ghosts. 8. Stevie Wonder, Living for the City, 1973. In 1973, Living for the City emerged as one of the boldest artistic statements in Stevie Wonder's groundbreaking album, Inner Visions. At just 23 years old, Wonder was no longer the teenage prodigy Motown had shaped. He was a prophet with a synthesizer. The song, which climbed to number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100, painted an unflinching portrait of systemic racism, poverty, and injustice in urban America. Its spoken word section, depicting a young black man falsely arrested and brutalized by police, shocked listeners with its realism. What most fans didn't know, however, was that the voice in that haunting interlude wasn't an actor. Stevie had recorded a real man who had endured police violence, capturing his raw emotion in one devastating take. The authenticity made the moment too real for radio. Several stations demanded it be cut. Stevie Wonder refused. He insisted the piece stay intact, declaring that to censor the truth is to silence the people. His defiance turned Living for the City into more than a protest song. It became a living document of the Black American experience. The recording process itself mirrored the chaos it portrayed. Wonder played nearly every instrument, layering Moog bass lines and clavinets that pulsed like the heartbeat of an overworked city. The arrangement was sparse yet relentless, forcing listeners to focus on the lyrics and the cries of injustice buried beneath the groove. The line "trigger-happy policing," written decades before the term became political shorthand, burned into the consciousness of a generation that was still reeling from the civil rights movement. The song's impact was immediate and unsettling. Living for the City was nominated for multiple Grammys and helped Inner Visions win Album of the Year in 1974, yet it also placed Stevie under quiet surveillance. Industry insiders whispered that federal agencies were wary of his growing influence and revolutionary undertones. Wonder's willingness to blend political truth with commercial success made him a target in the same way it had for Marvin Gaye 2 years earlier. But while others retreated from controversy, Stevie leaned into it. He used his blindness not as a limitation, but as a weapon. "I see through sound," he once said. And with this song, he made America listen to what it tried to ignore. Today, Living for the City stands as one of the darkest and most courageous R&B tracks of the 1970s, not because of violence or scandal, but because of its honesty. Beneath the funk groove lies a cry for dignity that transcends decades. It remains proof that soul music could confront reality without losing rhythm, that art could both move the feet and break the heart. Stevie Wonder turned pain into prophecy and prophecy into melody, crafting a masterpiece that still echoes in the streets it was written for. 9. Chaka Khan, I'm Every Woman, 1978. When I'm Every Woman burst onto the airwaves in 1978, it instantly crowned Chaka Khan as the fearless voice of female empowerment. The disco soul anthem, written by legendary duo Ashford and Simpson, became the centerpiece of her debut solo album and a declaration of independence from her band, Rufus. But behind the track's confident chorus, "I'm every woman, it's all in me," lay a quiet storm of resentment. The song, according to insiders, had originally been pitched for Rufus, the very group that helped launch Chaka's career. When she recorded it solo instead, some members felt blindsided, believing she had claimed what was meant to be a collective triumph. What the public heard as liberation, her bandmates saw as betrayal. The rift widened, and the sisterhood message celebrated on stage became a symbol of separation behind closed doors. The success of I'm Every Woman was meteoric. It reached #1 on Billboard's Hot Soul Singles chart and became an instant classic praised for its powerful vocals and lush orchestration. Yet controversy followed almost immediately. Early press materials mistakenly listed Chaka Khan as a co-writer, igniting confusion about authorship and royalties. Though the credits were later corrected to reflect Ashford and Simpson's work, the damage lingered. Whispers within the industry accused Chaka of taking more credit than she deserved, rumors that unfairly overshadowed her artistry. For Khan, who had fought tirelessly to be recognized as more than just a frontwoman, the accusations stung deeply. She wasn't trying to steal. She was trying to stand alone. But in an industry quick to pit women against each other, her success became both her armor and her curse. As years passed, the song's meaning evolved. "I'm Every Woman" grew into a feminist anthem embraced by women across generations as a statement of strength, sensuality, and self-possession. But the wounds from Rufus never fully healed. Members of the band continued to hint in interviews that the split had less to do with business and more with broken trust. Chaka herself later admitted that going solo was necessary but painful, acknowledging the creative tensions that had been simmering since the early 70s. Her booming vocals on the track, layered, commanding, and joyful, masked a private exhaustion. She was breaking free, yes, but also leaving behind a family that no longer felt united. Then in 1992, when Whitney Houston covered "I'm Every Woman" for the Bodyguard soundtrack, the old ghosts re-emerged. The new version became another global hit, and though Chaka praised Whitney publicly, industry gossip resurfaced about who truly owned the legacy of the song. Houston's version included a shout-out Chaka Khan, as both tribute and reconciliation, but to some it felt like reopening old wounds. Decades later, "I'm Every Woman" remains one of R&B's most empowering yet complicated masterpieces, a track born from pride, ambition, and pain. Behind its glittering beat lies a story of loyalty tested, credit contested, and a woman who dared to claim her voice in a world determined to control it. 10. Isaac Hayes, theme from Shaft 1971. When Theme from Shaft thundered across theaters in 1971, Isaac Hayes became an unlikely hero of cinematic soul. His deep baritone voice, wah-wah guitars, and lush orchestration created one of the most recognizable soundtracks in film history. The song soared to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, earned Hayes both an Academy Award and a Grammy, and made him the first black composer to win an Oscar for Best Original Song. To the world, it was a triumph, the moment a soul musician conquered Hollywood. But beneath the shimmering success lay a devastating truth. Because of a rushed contract with Stax Records, Hayes had unknowingly signed away his publishing rights. While the song earned millions, he received only a fraction of its profits, learning too late that the system had been designed to exploit his genius. The irony of Theme from Shaft was cruel. The man who wrote about a black detective who gets respect was being denied his own. Hayes's blend of funk, symphonic grandeur, and swagger gave the blaxploitation era its heartbeat. Yet the paperwork behind it stole much of his reward. Industry insiders revealed that Stax, struggling financially at the time, rushed Hayes into a deal that prioritized the label's survival over his future. The royalties he was promised rarely arrived. By 1976, despite global fame, Isaac Hayes filed for bankruptcy, listing debts exceeding $6 million. His story became a cautionary tale, whispered through recording studios, proof that talent alone couldn't protect an artist from predatory contracts and broken promises. Still, Hayes remained defiant. He poured his frustration into his music, continuing to push boundaries in albums like Black Moses and Joy. His ability to fuse gospel-inspired emotion with cinematic drama influenced generations from Barry White to contemporary hip-hop producers. But the scars from Shaft never healed. In interviews, Hayes admitted that success had cost him more than it gave. He became an outspoken advocate for artists' rights, warning young musicians to read every line before signing anything. The same velvet voice that once seduced millions now carried lessons about ownership, dignity, and survival in an industry built to consume its stars. Today, Theme from Shaft is remembered as a masterpiece of 1970s black artistry, bold, sensual, and revolutionary. Yet it also stands as one of the darkest reminders of exploitation within music history. Behind the swagger and brass sections was a man who changed the sound of film but lost control of his creation. Isaac Hayes' story exposes the hidden costs of genius, how even the most powerful voice can be silenced by fine print. His triumph was real, but so was the tragedy that followed, proof that not every legend's victory came with freedom. 11. The Temptations' Feat. David Ruffin, Cloud 9, 1970. When Cloud 9 was released in 1970, it didn't just reinvent the Temptations, it rewired the entire DNA of soul music. Gone were the polished harmonies and choreographed charm that had defined Motown's golden era. In their place came wah-wah guitars, layered percussion, and lyrics that hinted at social unrest and escape from urban struggle. Produced by Norman Whitfield, the track introduced the world to what would soon be called psychedelic soul. It was a daring risk for a group that had built its empire on romantic ballads. But not everyone within the Temptations welcomed the transformation. David Ruffin, the group's magnetic frontman who once led them to chart-topping success with My Girl, despised the new direction. To him, Cloud 9 sounded like chaos, a betrayal of the smooth elegance that had made them legends. Ruffin's resistance became a battle of ego and artistry. He argued that Motown was stripping away the group's identity in pursuit of political relevance, while others felt the world had changed, and so must they. The late 1960s had seen riots, assassinations, and a growing consciousness within Black America themes Motown could no longer ignore. When Ruffin demanded solo billing, tensions exploded. Despite his brilliance, his attitude and clashes with management sealed his fate. He was dismissed before Cloud 9's release, replaced by Dennis Edwards, whose grittier tone matched Whitfield's experimental vision. The move marked the end of an era. The Temptations without Ruffin were reborn, but never the same. Ironically, Cloud 9 became a massive triumph. It earned the Temptations their first Grammy Award, topped the R&B charts, and was hailed as the dawn of a new musical frontier. Yet success carried a heavy shadow. The song's psychedelic edge, inspired partly by the era's drug culture, drew controversy for allegedly glorifying escapism. Behind the scenes, it deepened divisions not only among the members, but within Motown Records itself. Traditionalists felt betrayed by Whitfield's experimental production, while younger artists saw it as liberation. Ruffin watched from afar as the group he helped build evolved without him, and the bitterness never fully healed. In retrospect, Cloud 9 stands as both a masterpiece and a breaking point. It captured the turbulence of its time, a nation reeling from change, and a band caught between eras. For the Temptations, it symbolized rebirth. For Ruffin, it represented exile. The song's trippy rhythms and distorted guitars disguised a deeper story of ambition, rebellion, and loss. Behind its Grammy-winning glory was the painful cost of evolution, how progress often demands sacrifice. Decades later, Cloud 9 still vibrates with that tension, reminding us that every revolution, even one set to music, leaves a few voices behind. 12. Donny Hathaway, A Song for You, 1971. When A Song for You was released in 1971, Donny Hathaway emerged as one of the purest voices of emotional truth in R&B. His velvet tone and spiritual delivery could turn simple words into sermons. The track, originally written by Leon Russell, became Hathaway's signature, a confession disguised as a love song. But behind its tenderness was torment. Donny was already battling the early stages of schizophrenia, a condition that blurred the line between reality and imagination. During recording sessions at Atlantic Studios, engineers recalled him trembling, weeping, and whispering that he heard voices no one else could hear. Midway through one take, He reportedly broke down and cried, saying, "I don't know what's real anymore." Those haunting words never made it onto tape, but their echo lived inside every note of the final version. To the public, A Song for You was a masterpiece of devotion, a man baring his soul to the one he loved. Yet for Hathaway it was something far more tragic, a plea for understanding from a mind unraveling. Between takes, he'd retreat into silence, often praying aloud or pacing the studio. Fellow musicians like Roberta Flack later described him as beautifully fragile, too sensitive for this world. His illness was often misread as eccentricity, and in an industry obsessed with perfection, there was little space for empathy. Donnie's genius came at the cost of his stability. Even as his voice soared, his psyche fractured. Every time he sang, he seemed to be reaching not just for harmony, but for sanity itself. Despite his struggles, Hathaway continued to produce brilliance. His collaborations with Roberta Flack on Where Is the Love and The Closer I Get to You brought him Grammys and acclaim, but the darkness only deepened. By the late 1970s, his paranoia had intensified. He believed people were tampering with his music-planting devices in his room and following him. Friends tried to help, but he often withdrew into solitude. The man who had written and sung so eloquently about love could no longer trust anyone, not even himself. Behind every performance was a silent battle that few ever saw, a war between his gift and his pain. On January 13, 1979, Donny Hathaway was found dead outside his New York hotel, an apparent suicide at just 33. The world mourned the loss of a genius who had sung his own requiem 8 years earlier. A Song for You. Once a declaration of love became his eternal farewell, a hymn for all who live on the edge of beauty and despair. Its melody lingers like a soul that never found rest, proof that even the brightest stars can burn themselves out too soon. Donny Hathaway didn't just sing from the heart, he sang from the fracture within it. 13. Bill Withers. Ain't No Sunshine, 1971. When Ain't No Sunshine was released in 1971, few could have predicted that its creator, Bill Withers, was still working full-time on an airplane assembly line. He wasn't a trained musician, didn't own a record deal when he wrote it, and had never seen the inside of a professional studio. Yet in just 2 minutes of restrained emotion, he crafted one of the most unforgettable soul recordings of all time. Inspired by the 1962 film Days of Wine and Roses, the song captured the ache of dependency, loving someone so deeply that their absence feels like darkness itself. But the real story of its creation reveals a man standing between ordinary life and unexpected genius, unsure if anyone would ever take his voice seriously. During the recording sessions at Sussex Records, Withers stood among seasoned studio musicians like Booker T. Jones and Stephen Stills, feeling like an outsider. He carried his lunchbox to the studio each day, unsure the record would even sell. When he first delivered the now iconic bridge, the repetition of "I know, I know, I know," the label executives thought it was an error. They insisted he shorten it, fearing listeners would lose interest. But Bill refused. He explained that the repetition symbolized obsession, the endless loop of missing someone who's gone. When you're that lonely, he said, that's all you can think about. Against industry advice, the 26 I knows stayed, becoming one of the most emotionally charged moments in R&B history. The song's simplicity became its power. With no elaborate production or vocal theatrics, Ain't No Sunshine distilled heartache into pure sound. Bill's raw delivery and minimalist arrangement, just voice strings and rhythm, cut through the noise of the early 70s, a decade dominated by lush orchestrations. When the song hit number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, Withers was stunned. He was still employed at the factory when the record began climbing the charts. Within months, he was performing on national television, holding the same hands that once tightened bolts on aircraft wings. The worker from West Virginia had become a soul poet for the world. Over 50 years later, Ain't No Sunshine remains one of the darkest, most intimate love laments ever recorded. Its brilliance lies not in technical mastery, but in vulnerability. A man whispering his grief until it becomes universal. Bill Withers would go on to win 3 Grammy Awards. Yet this debut hit still defines his legacy. What others called a mistake became his masterpiece, a reminder that imperfection often holds the deepest truth. In his quiet defiance, Bill proved that even the humblest voice can echo forever. Every time Bill Withers sang "Ain't No Sunshine," it felt like time stopped. His voice wasn't trained, but his honesty made him timeless. The repetition of "I know" wasn't a mistake. It was an emotional heartbeat, the sound of love refusing to let go. From factory worker to Grammy-winning icon, Bill proved that greatness can rise from the simplest truth. His quiet defiance reshaped soul music, reminding us that imperfection can be divine. But here's the question: was his pain the price of his art, or the reason it endures?